Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Fiber Broadband Association webinar. Today's webinar is how to leverage AI for your ISP, and it is presented by Sonar Software. I'm David Norris, webinar producer here at FBA. Before we begin, I just have a couple of quick housekeeping items to get through. Just to make sure everybody has the best experience, just note that you are in listen-only mode today. However, during this panelist conversation, we will be taking questions, so please do type your questions using the questions tool, which is located in the upper right hand corner of the interface there. We will be releasing this on demand as well following the webcast. That's usually up on our website within 24 to 48 hours, and that will be under the events tab on the FBA website. And lastly, we do have a very brief survey, a one-question survey at the end of today's webinar. If you could take a moment to answer that survey, we really appreciate it. It helps us out quite a bit. And with that, we are going to jump right in and get started. So today we are talking about AI-powered fiber broadband and what this transformative technology is going to mean for connectivity in the future, in the near future, how it's reshaping what we're doing with fiber. And so happily, we are joined today by some folks from Sonar Software. We have Lindsey Kelly, who is the VP of Marketing at Sonar Software, and she will be our moderator for today's conversation. We're also joined by Steve Schillingsberg, AI expert and CTO at Sonar Software. And they are being joined today by two experts, Andy Joles, founder and AI consultant at Roxology, and technology and marketing and market development strategist, Jason Presement. So welcome all of you. We appreciate you taking time to join us and to share this your expertise with us today. And with that, I will hand things over to Lindsey.
Amazing. Thank you so much, David. We're really happy to be here today. While there's two of us here from Sonar, today the conversation is really not all about Sonar. It's going to be all about AI. It's going to be all about answering questions that ISPs will have about that. And that's why Steve and I, although we are AI, I would like to say enthusiasts, and we really enjoy our conversations about AI behind the scenes here at Sonar. Andy and Jason are joining us today really as, additional experts that, I've had the pleasure of knowing Andy for a couple years now through some marketing channels. And Jason, I've just had the good fortune to meet recently, but he has a lot of experience inside ISPs. So I'm going to let each one of them give a very brief intro to themselves, and I'm going to throw in a curveball question for each of you. Don't get into the details of it just yet, but what is your favorite AI tool of choice at this particular moment in time? So I'm going to start with Andy.
All right. So quick background on me: 25-year marketer, 5-time CMO. I've been in the AI ML space since 2018. And been sort of in the generative AI space since 2022, which almost makes me an old timer in that relatively new space. And I was at a generative AI startup, and now I have my own consulting practice. My favorite tool? Oh, that's so tough. I really try to steer people towards the bigger tool. So I'm using, I'll use a tool that many of you may not know about, which is AI Studio from Google, which is, we'll talk about why, but it's just the highest token window. And so you can actually take massive amount of information and attack it. So we'll talk more.
Yeah, no, I just got my hands on that about a week ago. So I'll be excited to learn more from you later. Steve,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Nice to meet everyone. So Steve Schillingsberg, I'm the CTO here at Sonar. Too many years in the industry, software engineer by trade, and been a CTO in several organizations and leading technology organizations for a good long while. Been dabbling in AI for a long time, actually. Generative AI more recently, but predictive type AI in multiple spaces: healthcare, HR, facility and asset management. So and now in the ISP space. So great to meet everyone, and looking forward to this discussion today.
You don't get to skip the favorite tool question.
Oh, right, the favorite tool. I'm honestly struggling on that one because I'm kind of like Andy. I don't actually. There's not any one tool that's like absolutely awesome. However, I am a bit partial right now It might seem like I'm stealing this from Andy, but I'm pretty much using the Google tools right now. That is, yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at right now.
Yeah, so the aspect of how Gemini is kind of built into the Google Suite with Sheets and the Google Slides and stuff, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
That's a lot of fun. Okay, thank you, Steve. All right, Jason.
Good morning. Happy to be here. So real quick, over 25 years in the telecom space, helping customers or helping ISPs build out their networks with different type of solutions, whether it was core, edge, distribution, access in the home, all sorts of things. So end to end. AI has been more of an enthusiast thing for me for the past number of years since the some of the chat GPT and some of the Gen AI stuff started to come out and being made available. So definitely have an interest in that space and have been talking to a lot of people about a lot of different things, as well as the background I have in automation from way back in some of the other days as well, when some of this stuff first started to come out and people called it AI. In terms of my favorite tool, I actually have two tools. One of them is Perplexity, just because I think it's just a great tool to use instead of Google and everything else, and you get tons of information. But with everything else, garbage in, garbage out. But the other one that's more, I think, interesting is something called Make.com. I don't know if you guys have played with that at all. It's building workflows of automation, and it's a learning path, but it's powerful. And the things you can do with it to automate a number of things. I've started to use it in small things to automate some content things for myself. It's a pretty powerful tool and something that's worth investing some time in.
Yeah, no, that's great. And there's so many great tools out there, and I'll throw one of my favorites out there. Even though I know it's a lot more powerful, Andy, the AI Studio, I still love to go back to Gemini and ChatGPT, and I play them off of each other. And I did a fun little, I'll share a fun little story, and then I'll throw a poll out there, so then we can get started. Actually, go ahead and throw the poll out now, David, if you wouldn't mind, while I tell my story. So I used Gemini the other day because this is kind of a real world application of how one of your customers may actually use AI. I am moving to a part of the state of Florida where I live right now that I don't know who the providers are. So I went in and I prompted both ChatGPT and Gemini and asked it to go and evaluate, the Google reviews, any kind of reviews that it could find online, and give me the service providers in my area and what the different positive and negative reviews were. So instead of going to a regular Google to just do a Google search as who's available to provide internet to me in my new home, I went straight to, the large language learning model, the AI. So just my quick little story. Okay, great. So it looks like we've got some good results. I'll close this in about 10 seconds, but we basically wanted to understand what are some of the barriers that are preventing you guys from being able to utilize AI within your organizations. And so looks like we've got, a large majority of folks they don't know enough about AI. And, fun statistic, and Andy will correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's only about 7% of people that actually really know about things like ChatGPT, that are actually out there using it. Is it 7%, Andy? I thought I heard that recently.
Well, so 7% are using it every day, are using ChatGPT every day, but only like 49% of the country actually knows what ChatGPT is, which I found that astonishing too. So if you kind of do the math, that means like 14% of people actually know what it is, actually are using it every day. So it's kind of this really bifurcated experience right now. You've got a lot of people, you've got a few, this nice stronghold of people who are using these tools every day. And then you've got some people who just haven't touched this and don't know what it is yet. So I think that's what we'll dive in and talk a little bit about, some of the applications.
Yeah, no, that's great. So most of our folks here, almost 70%, they just don't know enough about AI or the application. So I think that's a great place for us to be able to go today. And I'd love to be able to start with, let's kind of set the stage for folks, because some people hear predictive AI and generative AI and then large language learning model. So let's start with breaking that down. And maybe Jason, if you could jump in first and just kind of give us that AI versus LLM.
Yeah, I won't give you the hour-long conversation I had with some friends over drinks a number of weeks ago debating what's what, because it ends up going nowhere. But it's sort of I'll break it into three pieces. I'll break it into AI, machine learning, and then these large language models, right? So AI, if you think of it that way, it's something, a machine that can simulate some sort of human intelligence or perform tasks. So visual perception, or speech recognition, some sort of decision making, problem solving, things like that. So I don't know, I think of robots when I think of AI, right? I think of these things that can actually get out there and do things and simulate human intelligence and see and driving autonomous vehicles, things like that, where there is some sort of automation or there's some sort of intelligence and decision making that's part of it. Machine language, or not machine language, but large language models, rather, that's sort of a subset of artificial intelligence, or AI, and it's really focused on the processing and generating human-like text-based training. It's generating human-like responses based on text that's put into it, or prompts that it's given to give you something that's more natural language, or text generation, translations, things like that. So it really is focused on processing and generating human-like interactions and human-like text. But it's not necessarily doing that sort of human intelligence piece, right? It's working with what it has. And then the machine learning, or machine, sort of that type of piece of things, is piece of technology, is really more about algorithms and statistical models and whatnot, and being able to synthesize that data. So what a lot of people call AI is truly just sort of learned models, or learn language, or large language model type of applications, or automation, quite frankly. And a lot of things are just automation based on data being put into something. But true AI, and we'll talk about some of those things and what people are looking at true AI. I think those are the ones, when people say in the poll they don't know enough about it, and they don't know enough about AI specifically, what are they looking for? What don't they know enough about? Is it what they should be looking at, what they should be looking for, or really ultimately what the results that they're looking to try and generate from it as well? That's the other piece.
Yeah. Yeah. You guys, anybody else have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just throw in, like, this is my barbecue answer, which is like what I tell people when I meet them at a barbecue is to say, so, you have a Netflix account and it's predicting what you should watch next. It's making suggestions. That's predictive AI. So the generative AI analog would be is if Netflix actually generated a show based on the shows that you actually watched. They actually made something, and it's like, you like these kinds of characters, these kinds of storylines. And by the way, that's probably going to come, but it's probably not going to be this year, right? So, but that's sort of the way to get people, that I found getting people to think about, oh, this is the difference. And because of that, like, Predictive's been around for 40 years, right? It's gotten better and better, but that's how I do it.
Yeah, well, and the generative, that would be something like the Suno, where you can literally type in, I would like you to create a song that's a country song about, my husband left me, my car broke down, and my rent is due, and I didn't get paid. And it'll actually write a song for you, and you can even tell it, make it a happy one, or find a positive aspect to it, or make it super depressing, and it actually creates. And so I think Steve's probably laughing because we actually have some folks in house, because we have a lot of engineers and really crafty people. They created a bunch of Sonar songs, and it was like, we love our customers, and it was really a lot of fun. So there are some fun applications for this stuff. But yeah, I think it's Suno.ai, SUNO. That was a fun one to play with. So.
Yeah.
Steve.
There's a lot. Well, it's interesting. It's I mean, there's a lot of fun things you can do. And if I'm someone at work and thinking about, well, how am I going to apply that to what I'm doing? Like, how does that apply to the ISPs? Well, look, there's a lot of fun stuff. You can kind of see where the market's going, where AI is going to is going. And I think my guess is that there's a lot of kind of very predictive type algorithms that really apply to the ISP space. So I think Andy's Netflix analogy is really spot on, to be honest with you. So it's really it's really the way to sort of think about this. And another way to sort of think about just AI in general is what are tasks that you do, like, that you're doing on a, kind of a normal, sort of a daily basis. Like the other day I was looking for a restaurant to go to. Well, what do we all do? We're looking at Yelp reviews, we're looking at ratings, we're looking at, like comments. Well, I can use AI to take care of a lot of those tasks for me. So they that's a way to utilize, AI. And it's like, okay, well, that's a problem I have. I want to go to a restaurant. I want to, I want to have a good experience. I don't want to waste my time. And I also would like to do this a lot faster instead of, sitting in front of a computer for an hour wasting my time. I really want to get to a restaurant. So help me find the best restaurant that I'm looking for here. And, that's a way to sort of think about, like, how a human thinks, and being able to kind of accelerate some of these things. It doesn't take the human out of it, because at the end of the day, the human's actually going to go to the restaurant and eat.
Yeah. And make sure that the food is good. But
Yeah.
I mean, to that point, you rely on reviews. And so like that comes back around to some questions that we'll get into from some folks who had put their questions in when they did their registration, about customer support and service and things like that, and how AI can help with that. But I'll jump right into one of the questions that someone had about how can AI be useful when the company hasn't been kind of well trained on it, and there are regional standards. So somebody want to jump in and answer that one? Not all at once.
I guess it depends on the context of what, what you're trying to get done. Again, it's just a broad general sort of thing. So if the company doesn't have standards, and if the company really hasn't put anything in place yet, I think it's you got to start from the other side and figure out what are you trying to actually, what's the result you want to get from this, right? And then figure out what do you need to go to get there, as opposed to saying, hey, how can I use ChatGPT to do something, as opposed to saying, I need to do this, what tools can I use to actually get it done? It's like it's a solution looking for a problem, as opposed to having something in place. So, I mean, there's all sorts of areas around data governance and security and everything else. And a lot of companies, I think one of the questions, one of the answers on the poll was that we're not allowed to use it because we don't want to be putting our corporate data into a public space. There's all sorts of private models that you can use. There's all sorts of things that you can build in-house and tools that you can use in-house to keep it contained within your own environment. So I think it's, you have to start somewhere and understanding what you're trying to solve, and then back it into that. I mean, that's kind of a vague answer, but other points of discussion around that for sure.
Yeah, and even and Steve, you may want to touch on this because it's something that I know we're going through right now on the back end internally. Our customer success team, one of the members had discovered a really cool AI tool that helped him, really keep himself organized in his calendar throughout his day, with AI moving his tasks around based upon his to-do list and what was the most important. I think it's called Motion. Can you talk about that? Let's talk about the process of that, Steve, because I know like we're in the process of looking at it now, and there will be an eventual implementation so that we can utilize that to keep our day organized. And so from a customer service perspective for the ISPs who are listening in right now, tell me a little bit about what the process is that you guys go through with the governance, internal governance, which is what's leading me to my next question from the audience, how to best govern the use within organizations. Talk about how you do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly straightforward. I mean, this isn't, there isn't like this big black box about this, but we think about, data security. One, is our data, by using, this tool, is it going to be secure? Is our customers' data going to be secure? Looking at tools, what kind of compliance standards does, that like a particular vendor have? So we do, some, as we do with any software tool, what sort of standards does that vendor actually have, and kind of do a checkbox on that. We've got, specific questions. We have, our own standards on just utilizing any kind of tool. And then the second piece that I think is most important is, the integrity. Like, let's do some proof of concepts. Let's look at the, the integrity of the tool itself. is it, is there any potential where we might actually be producing the wrong results, or what kind of quality standards in terms of outcomes, in terms of whatever sort of outputs actually put out there, what kind of quality standards do they have in place there? And typically we would do that through kind of a proof of concept and just sort of evaluating it from that standpoint. And honestly, we would apply this to really any tool. It's not an AI specific approach, but we do need to sort of think about I don't want I don't want a tool making recommendations that might seem a bit nefarious, right? Or just sort of the wrong, like absolutely wrong results. So that it's that kind of process. But and one, is it solving a problem, for the organization? Is this something that we want to roll out to the entire organization? A subset of that, like, is this a tool that actually is truly solving a problem? What kind of ROI are we getting on that? What's the efficiency gains on those things? Again, you're going to apply this kind of thing to any tool. You really should be applying this to really any tool that you're going to be utilizing or bringing into your ecosystem.
But Steve, you said something that was interesting though, that one of the challenges obviously that everybody sees is about the accuracy and the reliability of the data that you get out, right? So how do you actually validate to make sure that what the thing is kicking out is real data and it's reliable data?
Yeah, I mean, this is a sort of a you take an approach with a proof of concept. Utilize this for a bit, in somewhat of either in a real world scenario, but you've got to validate. So it's like trust but validate, trust but verify. Going back to my restaurant example, I was actually using Gemini to find a restaurant, and it actually recommended restaurants that were no longer, like, one wasn't even a restaurant, and the other hadn't been in business in about 10 years. And I'm like, that was a great restaurant. I remember that one. I wish it was still open. And I had to tell Gemini, I was like, this is actually not open anymore. And it's like, oh yeah, you're right. So you've got to trust, but you also have to verify that the results are right. And so as a software engineer, I look at this as, just applying, standard QA practices. There is a degree that, when rolling out any kind of tool, rolling out any sort of AI tool or tool in general, that you have to, there is a human component to this that, you shouldn't 100% fully rely on the accuracy of this. You do need to trust but verify.
But data, I mean, we've been saying data is the new oil for a long time, right? And this is now like never more true. The better you can train these models on, the bigger your knowledge base, the less likely it's going to hallucinate. If you've got the answers to every question that could possibly come up, then it's not going to try to hallucinate an answer. It's gonna drive that, and I think that's what we're seeing from the companies that are having success. They've actually taken the time and the discipline to really train these models effectively. And in the case of trying to figure out, well, how do I do this regionally? Then you're going to have to build regional models, or you're going to have to build it in such a way to where it can tell pretty easily, I'm trying to solve this this particular problem for Germany or for France. Localization and gets wrapped into this. But I think that's an important piece, is just to remember, it's like the data matters. From a consumer standpoint, what we see as tinkerers, of which a lot of us on this call are, we're gonna prompt differently. We're gonna say, check your answer 3 times to make sure that you're actually validating. We're going to jump in and use a different tool and just to validate. That's what we're seeing a lot of us do. But in Steve's world, like, they're trying to fix it so that the users don't have to do this, right? But we are seeing a lot of that right now.
Yeah. I'm just going back really quickly. Somebody had a really good question in reference to the CSR who was implementing motion, and what was the process for that integration to the company calendar. And I think it's a really good point, because A lot of times people are using AI in your organization and you probably don't even know it. And probably on, work laptops. So for this particular one, you can attach multiple calendars, but you can keep calendars private. So it just blocks time. So as a graduate student, he was using it personally, and then the connected calendar. So once he saw the power in that, he brought it to Steve, and now Steve is doing the due diligence. So it's education, I think, throughout the organization to say, let's just be careful, because if you don't have that kind of walled off instance of a Gemini or a ChatGPT, which, I'm so grateful we have it, because it's really challenging to constantly anonymize data and put it into ChatGPT. So, an example of how even I would be using it, just before we got Gemini, which was just a few weeks after I started, thankfully, I would have to go through my Google Docs, find the names of find names, find customers, make sure that was all removed, and then be able to put my data into ChatGPT. So if I'm looking for, as a marketer, what are the top challenges that, this sales transcript might say is this customer's need and challenge, I have to take all the information out completely before I put it in there. Not everybody knows to do that. So, sometimes there are interns that might not know this. So I think education is such a big piece of this that not a lot of people think about. Does anybody want to touch on that before I move to the next question?
I think Grammarly is a great example, right? That people use that day in, day out, and I know there's some organizations that have said, no, you can't use it. And I think they've figured out ways to get things done. There have been examples in education where things have been used where information shouldn't have been put up there. So I think that's another great example as well of a tool, just people just use it without necessarily understanding what's happening with the data and how it's being used and what's exfiltrating from an organization.
Yeah.
Actually, one more thing to add. I forgot about probably what the most interesting piece of this is, rolling out a new tool, and changing a tool that, folks had been using in the organization. Well, there's like a change management process to this. And so I was like, hey, I said this to my corporate, head of corporate IT. I was like, we need a change management plan. We need a, kind of a training plan. What do people do? And he had it in about an hour because he used Gemini to produce the whole change management plan. So it was,
right.
and I was like, yeah, that was brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, like, you can get so much done that used to be just like menial task oriented things. It's a great brainstorming buddy. It's not going to give you 100%, this is finished and it's great and amazing and I can use this. But if you practice prompting, which I think we can get into later if we have some time, because I'm going to jump into the next question. But it's you got to play with this stuff. You just have to figure it out. It's a big part of it. So really quick, we had one question: how are we may or may not know the answer to this, but how are ISPs using AI to predict service outages or needs?
So
yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say there's another question there that sort of goes with that around the one that was the solution looking for a problem. So I think some of these are tied together in terms of where what sort of tools can ISPs use. So I can sort of give you an area. I just have some notes here about 5 or 6 different areas that I've made notes of areas that ISPs can take advantage of AI. So network optimization, and we can dig into that a bit, customer service, operational efficiency, predictive maintenance, fraud detection, revenue growth, and sustainability as well. That's another section as well. So in terms of predictive service outages or needs, I think that's the question, Lindsey, that you brought up. This stuff's been going on for a while, right? And it just hasn't been called AI. It's just been automation, and it's been collection of data, and it's been predictive modeling. So there's more of that that's happening now. I think it's coming together more holistically with specific tools that are being put in place to manage it. And there's examples of where AT&T in the States, in Canada, you've got Rogers and Bell and TELUS, who are certainly using those tools today to do predictive network management, to do capacity planning, to do expansion planning, to do all those type of different things. But it's a matter of identifying patterns and trends and anticipating failures and disruptions before they happen. So the only thing that gets the challenge with some of that is disparate systems and different data sources and people collecting and reporting and talking about different data in different ways, so that in the old network management days, you had different domains of network management, and you started to have these managers of managers that would come in to manage all of these management platforms. It's starting to look like that in that AI realm as well, specifically around things like NetOps and predictive network management, where you will have something managing your access network, something that looks at your core and distribution networks, other pieces around that. Something's got to correlate it all together at some point and be sort of the large brain over all of these things. So it's not something that's new, but those are the applications where people are using it today. So it's basically, in terms of specifically predictive maintenance, identifying patterns, anticipating failures and disruptions. If you want to put things in there around service disruptions and needs, it's fraud detection, right? Analyzing things that are going on, anomalies on the network, and how that could bring down a network. There's also things in terms of hacking and SIM cloning and billing fraud, things like that. But the data is all there. It's just a matter of putting the application in place and using the right tools to do it. And I think there's absolutely applications today where all of that is happening and has happened, and there are some lessons learned starting to come out from that as well. A lot of it is all this cognitive computing, right, and repetitive processes too.
Yeah. Are there specific tools that can do that? Like, like an OpenAI or like a ChatGPT, which is from OpenAI. What are some of the tools that might be able to do that type of analysis and then produce hey, we may have a problem?
They seem to be, some of the ones I've seen are vendor specific today.
Okay.
I think you're starting to see some more come out from some of the large, cloud-based infrastructure guys around ingesting data and being able to come out with more sort of not generic, but more, what's the word I'm looking for? Just more holistic data in terms of what's happening across the network. If you take a look at the large platforms, Andy, I don't know if you've seen any that have sort of popped up or.
No, I think next year is going to be, I think next year is really going to be more the year we're going to see a lot more applications. I think right now what you see is the vendors kind of bolt this on and figure out how to, the current big vendors, and this is sort of in every space that I've seen. And then we've seen a lot of AI wrappers. It's sort of just the early innings, because we were talking about this before we got on a little bit. Is that, like, to me, last year was the year of content in AI. Like, let's go solve content problems. And this year is more, let's go solve the workflow and data analytics problems. And that's where we're kind of getting into this, particular use case. It's like, this is more of a data analysis, like how can we actually do this to get better in a predictive way? And you're seeing a lot of people like build in doing this and the bigger vendors, but you're not seeing as much sort of like, hey, here's a new application that's that's being delivered to the market. I think we're going to see more of that this year and into 2025.
Yeah, and kind of piggybacking on that, there was a great question about how long until network configuration and management will be controlled by AI or AI-powered interfaces. I mean, that could be this week, depends on how fast guys move.
Look, it's all. Look, so one of the other challenges of deploying this stuff is that people don't have the expertise in house to do it. That's been noted, that the people just don't have the expertise in house to build these things and get it done. So they go outside and they look for things to happen. But also, there's always, you go to any ISP, any ISP, but the majority of them have somebody in there who's sort of got a keen interest in this stuff and is the skunkworks person who's got the, the automation background, or they played with tools and they're starting to play with this stuff. And these things organically grow over time. This is why so many ISPs, a lot of them have homegrown systems. A lot of them have things that are off the shelf and modified and they tweak them. But, until it's something that is off the shelf, get going, I think it goes back to that, the comment about the multi-vendor collaboration, and are there, with open data sets and being able to everybody consume the same data and make the same decisions and understand what those things are. But there's examples of in the mobility space where with 5G splicing, right, being able to automate that process and do things that way. That's an example there. I think there are examples today with, if you look at the AT&Ts and you look at some of the operators in the US and the larger folks, where they have actually seen some, I'm just looking for one of my notes here, they've actually seen, increases or decreases rather in in miles traveled on dispatch, on staff productivity in the field from using some of these tools, right? And doing those things. But the majority of the work that's happening with the ISPs today and across the board, it all seems to be around customer service types applications, right? That people aren't necessarily focused. There's the engineering guys are focused on the NetOps side, but the business seems to be focused on tackling that big. How do we handle the customer service side of things? How do we make that a better experience for people? And let the network, because there's, I'll shut up in a sec here, but on the network side, there's been a lot of criticism around, is the juice worth the squeeze on the NetOps side, right? Are they going to spend the money to make the changes to get some sort of return that's questionable on the NetOps side, right? It's just, that's not proven yet. So back to Andy's point, I think you're going to see some of that stuff start to happen within the next couple of years, where there's some really solid applications or examples of where that's happened and made a big difference.
Yeah. And it's fun. Like, I love the conversation here, because we all said before we got on, this is like, a group of people having a beer and having a conversation, which is exactly what we were hoping for. We haven't even gotten to any of the questions that we have gone through as a group. We're still answering the questions from the audience. So thank you guys. Keep them coming. This one I think would be a nice one. Andy, I think you'll have a good answer for this. Any recommendation for prompt creation or development?
Yeah, so it turns out Google actually published a kind of a prompt guide, and I'll just go ahead and throw it into the chat. And I've been using this quite a bit. And it really just comes down, you'll hear people say like, well, you've got to do these few things. And it was nice to actually see one of the big players in the space kind of publish the guide and say, okay, you've got to really have persona, you've got to really outline what the task is, what the context, as much context as you can give it, and then what you want the format to be. Because if you don't tell it what you actually want the output to be, then it's just going to guess. And it's going to guess at all of these things if you don't give it. So the more you do this. Now, I'm in the camp, and this is where it's like having a beer with some friends. We'll see if everybody's in the same camp. Like, prompt engineering over time is going to go away. I think Chat GPT, 5, 6, 7, they're eventually going to solve this. But for now, this is what I kind of plug in whenever I'm doing something that's more complex. If I'm looking for a restaurant, I don't do this. But if I'm doing something that's more complicated, I'm going to actually put this in and change out the text and really give some thought to how I'm prompting. And so I just keep this in my notes file, and I use it every day.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, there's a couple different methods that people use. So, you just dropped Google's persona, task, context, and format. Another one that's very similar is RACE. It's role, action, context, and execution. And so I've actually been through, with some of the folks on the Sonar team, kind of how I do my prompting. And it helps me write everything from writing a blog post to answering an email to doing research on, a potential addressable market. So I'll literally have a whole Google file, because Gemini will eventually have something called GEMS, which is equivalent to ChatGPT's GPTs. The GPTs are like, you can basically save a lot of this stuff and it starts to learn from you, and you keep going into your GPT, which might be, this is Lindsey's blog writing GPT, because it's got my voice, my tone, and it understands who I am. I'm, a huge marketing dork. I spend my evenings watching, Christopher Penn and, and his newsletters and learning about things. Right. And so this GPT knows this about me. And I can then go in and say, hey, Lindsey needs to write you are Lindsey. Well, write a blog post about XYZ with, this kind of thing in mind, this kind of thing in mind. You have to talk to it like an intern that's completely green. And so that's what I have found has been really effective, is just, is having that kind of mentality when you're talking to it. And a lot of people don't know this or use this, but if you get an answer that you're really not happy with, you can do one of two things. And Andy, or Jason or Steve, you can jump in too, but you can either go up and click the little edit button at the top and change your prompt a little bit, because sometimes it's like, I'm not really sure what to do there, because maybe you've worded it in a way that you're like, oh yeah, no, he doesn't know exactly what I'm talking about here. Or you can keep prompting it below. And I usually have at least 6 or 7 prompts before I have something that I'm like, all right, this is about 60% of the way for me. So anybody else have any additional insights there?
I was just going to add, you can also just ask it to help you write the prompt, right? So if you're really stuck, is just say, hey, this is the problem I'm trying to solve. What should I be giving you in information to make this prompt better? And it does a pretty good job of helping you, outline this. It works a lot better than if you just ask a really, I think part of what makes it feel like we're in the early innings right now is there's a lot of like 0-shot and 1-shot prompting, which is like people are asking like a really basic thing, and then they're just looking at the answer and being frustrated and saying, this doesn't work. Like, I'm not going to use this. And we are still in the early innings. Like, those who actually invest a little bit of time and use a system, either the one Lindsey mentioned, the one that I put in, or another system, to actually have something that you actually use, will give you better output.
There are so many. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
No, go ahead, Jason.
There are so many people out there who are focused on prompting, right, in the AI world, and there are so many newsletters. I mean, if you read the Morning Brew and Hustle and all these things, every single one of them, there's a prompting example in there. And sometimes the prompt is actually longer than the answer you get out of it, which is sort of strange, but I guess it's quality of the garbage in, garbage out. But there's so many resources out there and so many people who have these cheat sheets and everything else about the right prompting things. The one that works for me is and many times I'll say, look, I'm trying to do this, blah, blah, blah. Ask me the questions you need me to answer to help you get a better response. Right. And then you challenge it as well. And then I find that actually it's an interactive process and it just digs a little deeper. And then you do get some different answers out of it, which works well.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go a little bit. It's almost I like to think of it. It's like I need to have a little bit more empathy for the actual engine itself, and it's like, all right, like help me help you, like and like you're talking to somebody maybe who's from a different culture, so help me understand like how you're thinking and what you need to get from me to be able to. So it's like this more empathetic approach with an actual machine, which is a little weird way to think about it, but
you can incent it as well, right? You can tease it and you can tell, hey, if you give me a real good answer, I'll give you a cookie, or I'll give you $1,000 or whatever. And I find you do that, and you re-prompt it, and you get a completely different answer with a little bit more insight. Like, it's just, there's some strange things in there.
Yeah.
Well, Jason, you hit on a really interesting point, because people always, when they watch me prompt, if I'm screen sharing and showing people how I do things, they're like, why do you say please and thank you? Why do you put so much detail? And the please and thank you thing is what usually gets people. They're like, why are you saying please and thank you? I'm like, these things were trained on humans. So they're good. Like, if you treat it more human-like and you speak to it as if it's, a partner, you're going to get a better result. A lot of times people say, oh, I tried it, it didn't really work. I asked to write me an email, and I said, write me an email for, a marketing nurturing campaign. And that's all they asked for. And so you're not going to get, to your point, garbage in, garbage out. So
no, but it works the opposite way as well too, right? Just a quick thing. I use DALL-E and ChatGPT, and I was trying to do something, and it had text on it. I don't know if you guys have used this much, but DALL-E does not do well sometimes with embedding text in an image. It spells things wrong, even though it's right there, even though it says Jason, let's say. It'll put JAASE with a backwards N or something like that. So at one point I said, look, I know you're not stupid. I know you can do this. Can you pay attention and do it properly? And it finally came out with what it had to have. So I think it's both ways, right? It doesn't pay attention sometimes.
Yeah, and to your point, for those of you who aren't familiar with DALL-E or DALL-E or however you say it, it's part of ChatGPT, and you can actually tell ChatGPT to create a certain image. But the more detail you give it, the better the output you get. So, give it a try. I showed my team, I said, create a beautiful fluffy gray cat who's perched on a rooftop and about to take a leap over to the next building. And like the more detail you give, they were like, oh my gosh, that looks so good. But of course, I did that on purpose because I don't know if any of you tried it in the early days, but I tried to create, a person riding a horse and there was like an arm coming out of the back of the person. Like there were some really strange things, and it's really bad with fingers. Just know those things, guys. Just know those things. It's entertaining. So yeah, and back to you, Jason. I see you answered this question kind of, but in reference to if you solve the NetOps side, you minimize the interaction you need on the CS side, chicken versus egg. So just a little bit.
Yeah, so that chicken versus egg, and I came back with a cart before the horse, right? So I think you've got the chicken versus egg is sure. If you saw, I think that's partially. I'm not going to agree or disagree. I think it's right, but I think that's only part of it because there's all sorts of other things on the CS side that really don't necessarily have anything to do with, let's say, the NetOps side. As an example, if I've got a front end piece that's answering a call, taking in that first interaction, and it's another language. All of a sudden, I've got something now doing translation where I don't have to have a certain person doing translation. If it's and Lindsey, we talked about this before. If it's someone calling in with a problem that has nothing to do with the network, if it's someone calling in, we talked about the old secondary audio program thing, right, where people would turn their TV on and say, "I'm seeing words. How do I get rid of these words?" And that's usually people with these large button remotes and things. If they can call in and just say, hey, I'm seeing all these different words on my phone, and all of a sudden, because you've got thousands and thousands of these calls that have come in, just say, well, press this button on your remote, and it'll go away. Never an interaction with anybody human. The call was answered quickly. The CSRs are working on more complex problems. Your first call resolution is way down, and someone's off the phone and happy, right? So that I'm not, that doesn't necessarily have something to do with NetOps, but on the NetOps side, sure, if there's an outage, and you've got something going on in the network or there's some degradation of service, being able to proactively notify people and say, hey, there's an outage, don't call in. Or when people call in, be able to handle that automatically as opposed to, again, tying up a call over and over again with 10 people or 10-minute calls, trying to help people understand that it's a known issue. So I think there's two sides to that. I think there's no right or wrong. I think it's an and, not a but. But yeah, I think there's two sides of it.
Yeah.
Well, I also think, like, on the customer service side, so the Klarna story, if you haven't seen it, like, the big headline was they're able to eliminate 700 jobs through implementing their generative AI customer service solution. Well, that's not really what the story was as much. Like, if you drill down into it, it's like, well, they were able to reduce issue resolution time from 11 minutes down to 2 minutes. They could resolve 2/3 of their customer service chats, which was 2.3 million conversations, by implementing this solution. So they just found, like, this is going to handle, a lot, but it's not going to do everything, and it's going to improve their brand, because obviously if they get from 11 minutes down to 2 minutes, that not only helps them from a profitability standpoint, but it also just helps in terms of the brand. Like, the marketers have to be happy with, like, oh, wow, this is going to lead to much better service. And then Zendesk came out and they're like, look, like, we're seeing, if you use Zendesk AI, which was their AI kind of bolt on to Zendesk, they're seeing, like, when it was a 3x increase in immediate automated resolutions and a 30% decrease in resolution time. So not the same, like, 11 to 2 minutes, but still, like, a very meaty sort of improvement, impacting that by 30%. So, and I met a bunch of the Zendesk tech team recently at an AWS event. They talked about, it's like, yeah, like, what we're figuring out is better to, like, put these tools in the hands of service agents than instead of the consumers. So, like, let's figure out how do we arm them with better tools versus just, like, working on the direct-to-consumer application. Some of this will actually be, like, immediate, automated resolution, but some of this is just going to make the reps better. And you'll see this, Target's rolling this out in their stores in August, that all of their you folks who work in the store are now going to have a Gen AI based knowledge base on their phone that they can go use to help answer questions. So they were like, let's attack it there versus just like launching this on the website and letting consumers answer their own questions.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And let's see, we have 8 minutes left. Let me see if we can get through. I'm so pleased we haven't had to go through one of our questions that we all sat down and came up with together. So here's a good one. Any examples of ISPs using full business planning and data analytics? Example, real estate permitting and population growth trends in relationship to the proximity of the network in support of build-out case data. Any takers on that one?
Or just fully automated? Well, I think there's tools out there where there's tools like Vetro and all these other ones with all the infrastructure mapping and all the asset mapping and everything else, where if you have all that data, you can use that data to give you an answer. I don't know if it's down to the point yet where someone says, hey, I want to go build out these 50,000 homes, tell me everything about everything and build me a plan. But I definitely think there's tools out there where it's a collection of data where you can do a synthesis and analysis with that data. Past that, I think there's people better qualified than me who focus on that space specifically, who in industry who definitely could throw some additional information in there. I think there's a ton of not a ton. There's some very good tools out there that are starting to pull that information together and be able to do exactly that.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, I know just even personally, I will go into either a ChatGPT or a Gemini and just kind of start asking questions, ask it to do research, ask for, where are you seeing articles of, from media entities that are showing growth or different population trends or things like this, and start to just aggregate your own data. That's one way that I know I've used it personally. But there isn't a magical tool yet that I know of.
No, and I'm just reading the question here. I guess that, as real-time management, penetration data, and compilation of FCC carrier infra markets along with public package offerings. So just as an example there on the Canadian side of things, from a regulatory side, I have a private chat GPT that I dump a tremendous amount of regulatory and the CRTC up here as opposed to the FCC data into that. So I've created my own chat GPT that stores all that stuff, and I query that all the time. So as much as it's not real-time management of this stuff, it is a more of a Gen AI based query to be able to get better information out of it than just going out to the web and saying, hey, search this stuff, because you just won't get the same level of pieces out of it. It doesn't give you different sort of market data, but there's all sorts of things you could put together. I know that, there's third-party data companies out there as well that do a lot of this stuff. That have a lot of the data that they pull from municipal data, city data, like Claritas, some of these other folks that provide that level of detail, so that you can start to merge some of that. But then you got to feed it into something to do something with it, right? You just can't take that data; you have to put it into something to synthesize it. So I think things are getting there. It's a combination of tools at this point, I think, for that specific use case.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So, I know we're coming up on time here. I did want to throw one question out for all of you to answer from, I know of all of the well over 24 questions we came up with, just in case we needed them. I'm really curious to hear this, and I think the audience may be as well. It's kind of a lessons learned approach. So what were some of the key challenges you faced during your AI implementation journey, and what advice would you give to ISPs just starting out? Steve, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'm probably going to tackle this from a slightly different perspective. So a little bit again about my background, CTO for private equity-backed companies. I can tell you in the last few years, the AI has just been such a buzzword, and I was really being pushed as a CTO to, well, why aren't we implementing AI? And as opposed to well, what problems are we trying to solve? And that to me has been the biggest challenge. So, the poll here shows that, people aren't really sure, what AI does, where the applications are. And I would say that you're, on the journey, find a problem, really think about the problem. what data do you have about that problem? And that is the first approach. How can I leverage tools, AI, to help me solve this problem? What are the outcomes? Really think about what outcomes you're really trying to get out of it. As opposed to, I'm just going to go use this because this is what people are using. I'm being asked to use it. That's been the biggest challenge for me, and that having to argue at an executive team and debate this, and at the private equity, at the investor level, and it's like, again, focus on the problem, what data you have, and focus on what what outcomes you're actually trying to achieve.
Yeah, not just AI for the sake of AI.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Andy, how about you?
Yeah, so I both 100% agree with Steve, but I think we're in this difficult challenge, which is you may come up with a problem that's a little bit of a Ferrari, and you haven't even gotten your learning permit yet. And so part of where I think the change management issue is a really, really big issue right now. And I think we need to do more to get people to develop the habit of using these. I think part of the problem is the market has sort of been fragmented, as we talked about. We've got the people on this, on the screen who all use this every day. And so we've built this as a habit. But we need to get sort of the rest of us to start building this as a habit, and then you can actually be able to attack some of these bigger problems. And so one of the things that I would just, as a takeaway in the last couple of minutes, I'm like, add these apps to your phone and put them in the lower two bars, and start using them. They aren't answer question apps. They are thought partner apps, right? This is how you should actually think about this. And if you start to actually build the habit and just doing like the example, Lindsey, that you said, and using personal examples, that's one of the things that I get teams to do is like, let's do personal things as well as professional. So you can actually start to build a habit so you can get to the place where Steve and the rest of us want you to be of tackling, the right problem set.
Thank you. Yeah, and then as Jason's answering, because I know we're at time here. I was going to say thank you so much, David. Sonar is going to be in Nashville at Fiber Connect. We are so excited. Please come see us at booth 285. We created a super special commemorative pin. So stop by and get one. It's got a very similar logo to what you see here on the screen. But Jason, why don't you take us out with your 2 cents on lessons learned?
Sure. I don't know how many emails I get a day from use this AI tool, use that AI tool. We have this tool, we have that tool. It'll help you do this, it'll help you do that. How do you to navigate those tools, right? Figure out which ones, separate the wheat from the chaff, figure out what's a good tool, what's a bad tool, and actually do they do what they're supposed to do? I don't know how someone in an enterprise environment being inundated with all these different phone calls and things from people saying, I will solve a problem that, number one, you don't even know you have yet, or that you're going to have, or that you might have. Use this. 10 minutes later, the same email from somebody else. So it's that evaluation process, coming up with some sort of structured way to evaluate these tools and find out if they really solve a problem that they say that they can solve and that you legitimately have. But it is navigating that process is always, it's like every other tool, but there's more so. It's every day there's a new one that comes up.
Oh yeah, every day, and it's just going to keep growing. It's not going to slow down. There's going to be things that we never would have imagined are available. But I just wanted to thank all 3 of you guys for joining us. Andy, Jason, Steve, thank you. Thank you to the audience. We only got to 1 question from what we had talked about before. So we appreciate your participation and interest, and we appreciate you guys having us today. Thank you.
And I hop back on. I just want to extend my thanks to our panelists. This was an exciting conversation. I certainly learned a lot, so appreciate that, and appreciate the plug for Fiber Connect as well. I'll be sure to stop by and get my pen, and we're looking forward to seeing you there, and of course all of our attendees there as well. If you haven't already looked at Fiber Connect and made your plans, I encourage you to do so. I'll throw up a quick QR code here so that you can go out and register and find out all the details and get the agenda and those types of things. In addition to Fiber Connect, we also have our regional shows coming up, including one in Calgary. So we're excited to be visiting up north for the first time this year. So we're looking forward to that. And I'm trying to see where Calgary is in September, or I'm sorry, that's Des Moines. Calgary is in October. So we will see everybody there. With that, thank you very much for participating. We look forward to seeing you on the next one, and we look forward to seeing everybody at Fiber Connect. Have a great day.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.